I suppose you need to say that this work was made at a certain date, 1989, which made it a very pioneering work in the sense that at that time there was very little evidence of, let's say, interactive, computer-generated media art. And that one of the reasons for that is that the technologies for doing this before that, before 1989, were in fact very difficult to come by. The only machines that could do this, let's say around, because I wanted to make this work earlier. I was planning to make it around the mid-80s. And I was looking for the technical resources to do this. And the only place I could find these technical resources at that time was in the simulation industry, the people who were doing big simulators for aeroplanes. And actually I was talking to a French company, Sogitech, big French company who were doing simulators. We talked about doing this work, but I don't know, they wanted like 1 million francs or something. At that time it was still franc, but it was an awful amount of money they wanted to do this because it was in the context of the simulation industry. So it was only in 1989 that some computers came on the market, a company called Silicon Graphics, and they started to sell a computer which was still insanely expensive. It was, I think the machine I bought was around 100,000 US dollars, okay? But I got a 50% discount, so it only cost me 50,000 US dollars. But can you imagine? And I promise you, this machine is less powerful than your mobile phone now. I can do this work. You could build this work using a mobile device these days. But at that time, so this work really belongs to that moment when, as an artist, and not I, but also a community of artists at that time, late 80s, early 90s, first had access to equipment which would allow you to create works of this kind. So actually, this work, when it was shown for the first time, was a very, very exceptional experience, because most people had never seen anything like this before. So that's let's say the technical context of this work. The other thing I think which is important to understand about this work and why it was so successful is because the bicycle is a very natural interface. And so the usual interfaces that people had been developing till then were, the joystick and a mouse and keyboard, the game type of interfaces. But this work presented the idea of a bicycle, a completely natural, everyday, something which everybody can do, is experience. When you get on a bike, you know what a bike does, you just need to pedal it. And this transparency of the interface was very important also for the success of this work. And also it introduced another important element, and that was that the work offers not just a visual experience, but also a body experience. Because as you are pedaling, you are using energy, and you're using your arms. So it's a full body engagement. And this also is very important aspect of a certain, let's say, direction in media art, the engagement of the viewer's whole body. So interactivity, not just pushing buttons, but actually engaging your whole body experience. Now the work itself is it's 3 cities. The first one we did in 1989 was Manhattan. The artist I worked with, who wrote the text, had recently been visiting Manhattan and living there for some months, was very inspired by the city. So he was able to write the stories based on his own experience of living in Manhattan. And we also chose Manhattan, quite honestly, because it has a certain simplicity. You know, the streets are all straight. Because the challenge for this work was to write text and to put the text on the streets in the proper scale. And this is before the time of Google Maps or Google Street View, so that we didn't have those tools. So we had to take a map, measure the lengths of the streets, create a software program where you could write text and fill these streets one by one. And also, you know, wanting to make sure that you didn't break the words at each intersection. So you would have a complete phrase or a complete sentence on each street. So Dirk Groeneveld, who wrote the text, was very careful to organize the text so it fitted on the streets. And also in this work you see all the words, all the text is one size, yeah? And basically it only respects the plan of the city, which is different to the Amsterdam version, where you see the text has different sizes. And here the work is even more, let's say, intensive in terms of preparation, because every letter is replacing an actual building, a real building, and is the size of that building. So we actually went along these streets, took photographs, got drawings from the city of these buildings, so we could have a rough idea that, you know, this building is 15 meters high, this building is 10 meters high. I mean, it wasn't to the centimeter, but we wanted to have the proportions of each building. So here, not only do you have text along the street, but you have text which actually embodies the shape of the buildings, the architecture. So if you know Amsterdam, if you know the city, you can recognize where you are. Certain shapes are very, very recognizable, and you will immediately know where you are in the city. And also, if you live here, you can actually bicycle to the letter which is your house, right? You can find your house, yeah. And also another interesting little anecdote is that we once showed this work in Amsterdam in one exhibition space, which is also in the database. So you could bicycle in the virtual Amsterdam and bicycle to the building where you actually were bicycling, to that place. Yeah. All the texts tell stories, and do you want to pedal a little bit, and I'll just explain how that's done. So basically the way it works is this. It's a little bit of discipline, but you need to keep the letters on your left. And as you bicycle, you can read the text as it comes towards you on the left. Of course, in Amsterdam it's in Dutch, so you need to be able to read Dutch to be able to understand what is being said here. But if you go to the Manhattan version, it's not so difficult, you see. So I realize there are sentences in this city that try and promote group thinking. Okay, so this is the way if you want to read the city, this is how you read it. You read the text as it's coming towards you on the left. And also the Manhattan version has another feature, which is that you see the different colors. And each color is a different narrative. Different people are speaking. So these are fictional narratives of different people. And to give you I mean, if you see here that, keep going.
Yes, okay.
My name is Noah Webster. Now Webster is the guy who wrote the Webster's Dictionary. So this is the voice of Noah Webster, the person who wrote the Webster's Dictionary. And he was a resident of Manhattan. He lived there. So he is one of the voices, one of the people that talk to you. Another character is a taxi driver. Another character is Donald Trump. In this situation, he represents real estate sort of mogul, Yeah, he was not yet president, of course. There's also the mayor of New York, of Manhattan, and there are some other characters. I've forgotten exactly who. But the color coding means you can follow one narrative. If you want to, you can follow one narrative of each person. But of course, another basic principle of this work is that you don't necessarily follow one narrative, but you just go wherever you want to go. And in the process of doing that, you are creating a kind of, you are assembling the phrases from different texts. So this is also a sort of recombinatory narrative. And this is also a very fundamental topic for interactive art, and that is, how does narrative work in an interactive artwork? And one way that narrative works is that you create a space of multiple narratives, and you let the viewer travel through these multiple narratives and assemble, yeah, a personal narrative in the process of the journey they are making. Which is not so different to what happens in real life, because when you, let's say, if you're a tourist and you visit a foreign city, you will also pick up fragments of knowledge here and there. So each person will in a way, discover narrative fragments in any city and build this into a personal narrative, which is your personal experience of that city. Yeah? So this links also to the idea of psychogeography, which was a concept developed by the situationists, which actually appreciates the fact that an urban landscape is actually a narrative landscape. It's a place of memory, it's a place of social engagement, that the buildings in a way are just the framing of many patterns of experience, patterns of narrative, patterns of encounter. So in a way, this work replaces the buildings with this sort of the hidden narratives that every city has. And of course, every city already has lots of text. I mean, there's advertising text, there's all kinds of text. I mean, even the names of a street, a name on a street will tell the story of that person. So an urban environment is saturated with narrative information. And that's what the legible city is all about. It's about bringing this out. And so while the Manhattan version are these different people who are telling stories, they are fictional stories, but they are written by a writer. The Amsterdam version, the Karlsruhe version, which is in German, and the Amsterdam version actually use texts which come from historical sources. So the texts here are actually found in newspapers from the 19th century, early 20th century. So these are actually stories that are memory. You could say this is to do with the memory of the city. And to give you one example, if you bicycle on one canal, let's say the Prinsengracht, and you start here, you go all the way around the canal, and then you turn around and come back. On that one canal, you will have one story, which is one person who actually lived on that canal. And it's his personal story. I mean, it's a slightly silly story, but it's a story of someone who, made money and then decided to run away with his money and leave his family, in the lurch, yeah. And so it was a newspaper article that Derek found about somebody who'd lived on one of these canals. So actually, the stories sometimes are quite trivial, yeah. But the stories actually are linked in Amsterdam. They're also linked to the location. So it sounds a bit sort of obvious to say this, but if you're bicycling around the red light district, you will have stories that are linked to the identity of this area. And the Karlsruhe version also has this characteristic that the text actually tells you about the history of the city. Okay, that's any questions about Legible City? The other thing, I mean, it's just a little detail, but so this is technology of 1989, 1990, which actually is quite obsolete technology. But actually it doesn't look obsolete. It still looks quite fresh, and generally people still enjoy to experience this work. And it's interesting to ask, why is that? How can a work... Because people often criticize media art, and they say, you know, media art is not the same as painting or sculpture, because the technology is going to be obsolete. And then they make the connection, they say if the technology becomes obsolete, then the artwork becomes obsolete, as if the fact that the technology obsolete makes the artwork obsolete. But this is not true. It is true in some cases, but not in all cases. And in this case, since we are only dealing with text, and that's all we need to see. We need to see text, we see some clouds, we see some ground. The simplicity of this is all that is needed to express the work. It doesn't need to be more complex. In other words, it doesn't need more technology. It just, this is enough technology to make this work as good as it needs to be. Yeah. I have to say though, I mean, just to give you, to make this detail a little bit more, when I made the work in 1989, it was not technically possible to have clouds. The computer couldn't do clouds. So there was a little improvement in 1990, because I thought it would be nice to have clouds. But now the clouds are there, I think I don't need to do more. Heaven's Gate is an earlier work. I think it's 1986 or 87. So it means it was also a work that was before the time when I had access to the kinds of computing infrastructure that I would need to make works like this. Yeah? And actually, Heaven's Gate, I think, is probably one of the few or only video installations or video artworks which I made. But again, there is it was made because there was a specific moment in history when a certain, let's say, technical, logical opportunity presented itself. And so in general, I would say in the history of media art and the history of the development of media art, not just my practice, but in all media artists that I know of, you see, I wouldn't call it progress, but you see certain stages of development in their research, which is linked to certain developments in the technological sphere, because at a certain moment new machines become available, and these machines offer certain opportunities which were not there before. And as media artists, we are hungry for these new opportunities, okay? Because generally speaking, I would say in general, these technologies are certainly not as versatile as painting or sculpture. They are very strict, very tight constraints on what you can do and what you can't do. So Heaven's Gate belongs to that moment in history when video studios brought the first generation of real-time digital effects into the video studio. Now this, I can tell you the name of the machine. It was called a Quantel Mirage. It costs about $1 million US, this machine, so it was only the high-end studios that bought these machines. And it was really a machine which could, for the first time, in real time, do 3D effects with images. And it was used almost exclusively for advertising and gimmicks, you know, sort of logos that were flying around and very flashy things. So in other words, it was used in a, I would say, in a fairly vulgar way, but it was very, very fashionable. And so a lot of advertising done was done with this machine. But it was interesting because as an artist, I'm not a programmer. Okay, so it's as an artist, I like to work in real time. So I like to see what what I'm getting. So in a work like this, you know, I have to describe what I want, give it to a programmer, and then I get to see the result after a certain period of time. But there is a great pleasure in being able to just sit in front of a screen and make things happen immediately and make certain strategic decisions, also aesthetic decisions, slower, faster, this shape, that shape. It's a very, and this machine offered that opportunity to do that, to be able to make, you know, on-the-spot decisions together with an editor. So that work, Heaven's Gate, is all about how this machine, this Quantel Mirage, enabled me to create a work, to edit a work, yeah? And it's actually a work which is only constructed out of static images, photographs, which I just mainly took from books. So all the imagery here, there's no moving imagery at all. All the imagery is just pictures. So it's almost a work you could say not of photography, but it's a work of an archive of images, and it's the Quantel Mirage which is actually creating the transformations that as you move from one image to another. So the animation comes from the digital transformation. And the work is about, in terms of content, the work is about, basically about two things. It's about, or really about one thing. It's about how you, it's a work about a point of view. And I'm making a comparison between the Baroque point of view, which is a point of view of people standing on the Earth's surface, looking up to the heaven and seeing ecstatic, I mean, in the Baroque view of the heavens, an ecstatic sort of holy vision of the universe. And of course, in the Baroque, you have an enormous interest in creating a sort of hybrid illusion of architecture and painting and sculpture. So in many ways, the illusionism of the Baroque is very parallel to the sensibility, yeah, of the illusionism of the digital. Yeah? With the digital, you can also create hybrid fabrications. And also, the Baroque is very much involved with optical illusions. So the image space in a Baroque church is really constructed as an optical experience, so that when you enter the church and move through the church, the imagery is actually being sort of choreographed to where you are in the space. So these are important things that are characteristic of the Baroque. And this also becomes important in this work, because this work is also to do with where you are physically in relation to the image, and also the digital transformations are to some extent a parallel sort of sensibility to the Baroque anamorphosia, yeah? This optical distortion of the image in relation to your point of view. So the digital effects have a certain Baroque quality to them, you'll see. But the other point of view that's expressed in this work is the contemporary point of view, which is the satellite view, where we see the planet Earth from high above. So now we are in a position where, compared to the Baroque, where you were locked to the planet's surface and could look up at a mystery, right? we have another, you could say, mystery, which is the mystery of our planet seen from above, seen from the heavens, looking back down. Yeah? And this work basically oscillates between these 2 points of view, and it also expresses these 2 points of view by projecting up, and then you seeing the reflection below. So it's not literally up and down, but it means basically you are standing in a kind of spatial, in an axis between an above and below. And the work itself expresses also an oscillation between looking up and looking down. The work also has some quotations from some contemporary artworks and some other artists. So I also decided to link some other let's say art historical references, because I thought they were relevant to this inquiry, or this sort of thematic. So you will see images of paintings by William Blake. You will see a painting of El Greco. You'll see a work of Piero Manzoni, which is a box with the title Corpo d'Aria, which is, I don't know if you know this work, but it's just a balloon, basically. You blow in it, and basically it's the volume of air, which is the artwork. And there are a number of other art historical references. There's also Rodchenko, the Russian early 20th century photographer, who was completely infatuated with photographing from high up, looking straight down. So he discovered the language also of what it means to look up and look down and see this point of view. So many of his photographs explore this. So I thought it would be interesting also to introduce this. And also there is one example, I think, of a futurist painting of Marinetti. So the work basically plays between the Baroque and the satellite imagery, but at the same time introduces a few other art historical references. Yeah. As an artist, if I have to admit something, as an artist I like to make work which is very accessible to a general public, because it's just simply pleasurable and accessible. But at the same time, I like to make work that's good for insiders. Okay, so for people, especially for people who have a good art historical knowledge, I think it's interesting to make work where you can recognize things. Because of your knowledge base, you can see things. Which I think, these are things which anyway are going to be meaningful to everybody, but to have a layer of, let's say, a slightly esoteric layer is something I've always enjoyed. So this is the golden calf. It's a recent version of this work. In its original configuration, it was using a different kind of sensor, a magnetic center, which actually was inside the pedestal and was connected by a cable to another sensor here. So there was a magnetic emitter in there, sensor here. And also this was not at that time an iPad, this was in 1994, but a television, small television screen. So actually there's an important difference in sensibility, because at that time the golden calf was really a work about taking a TV screen in your hands and it becoming a window into a virtual world. The virtual world being a hybrid of the real world and virtual reality, so augmented reality. The pedestal as a real object, and here on the screen one would see a virtual golden calf standing on top of the pedestal. So bringing together these two realities, the material reality of the pedestal and the virtual reality of the golden calf. The golden calf, of course, as a biblical creature, an object of idolatry because of its material nature, both as an animal and as a block of gold. And now in its current manifestation, we have again a creature that's apparently gold, but now is a virtual creature. In other words, the digital golden calf has a completely new identity to the biblical golden calf, which opens a question about, to what extent this idol is different, and to what extent the digital idol has a new identity in relation to the meaning of this object. The technology used today is a little different because I'm using the video camera on the iPad to recognize this pattern, which is a piece of marble, traditional material of all sculptors. So the pattern on the marble is being recognized by specific software and via the camera. And as a result, this optical system is able to measure or track the exact position of the iPad as I move around the pedestal, so that the virtual golden calf can be seen from all different points of view. And another interesting aspect of this hybridization of real and virtual worlds, this mixed reality capability of new media, is that I also have 4 video cameras embedded in the pedestal. Together, these 4 video cameras create a panoramic video view of the whole space in which this is located, and this then is reflected onto the skin of the golden calf. So as I'm moving around in front of the golden calf, I can actually see myself reflected in its shiny surface. So again, this creates another level of paradoxical relationship between the reality of this environment, the reality of my presence, and being able to see my presence reflected in this non-existent, this virtual creature, which apparently is standing on top of the pedestal. Works come about because of certain, contextual opportunities. The contextual opportunity here was that this man, Edwin Thumboo, is a Singaporean poet, a quite famous Singaporean poet, and he was invited as an artist in residence or visiting professor at City University in Hong Kong, where I work. He was invited by the English department, and he was there for half a year. And because of the fact that he was there, it offered the opportunity to do something with him, to do a project with him. So the project that evolved was based on a certain idea of recombinatory poetry, and in a way it has a strong affinity also with the legible city, which is linked to a whole tradition of concrete poetry, recombinatory poetry, this group of poets known as the Udipo, people like Calvino, who were very interested in these kind of literary experiments, and also especially a French poet, Raymond Queneau, whose really famous work is the book he made, which is, I don't know, what is it, million poems. And basically the simple idea is you have pages, and every page is cut on every line. So in principle, you can turn every line, so you can recombine every line of the text which is written there in almost infinite number of combinations. And this does actually the same thing, but let's say the structure is different. Instead of taking pages and cutting the pages, what's happening here is that in each instance here, Edwin is reading one of his poems. So in this instance, he's reading poem A. In this instance, he's reading poem B, poem C. He chose the poems. These are poems which he's written over his whole life. So it's a selection, I think, of around 28 poems that he made. And he reads these 28 poems, which were, again, written at different points in his life. So it's a kind of representative of his complete œuvre as a poet. And what happens is that when you are moving this knob, you are moving that little dot, and if the dot is on top of him, then he is the one then you see this and you can see the poem that he's reading. So now if we just stay there, he will read the entire poem from beginning to end. But if I now move to another position, it will jump to another poem. It will wait until a phrase is finished. It won't jump immediately. It will let one phrase finish, and then it will start the next phrase. Because what we want to happen is that there is a way in which the poem is being broken into little modules, little phrases, and that you can recombine these phrases. So actually here we have an infinite, poem that can be built using fragments of these 28 poems. And sometimes you'll, as you read it and as you see these accidental or serendipity conjunctions, sometimes you are very touched by the way it really fits together and a bit shocked by this. Other times, of course, there's a sort of disjunction. You cannot guarantee that the narrative flow is always consistent. For Edwin too, this was a remarkable experience. You can imagine, you have a whole history of your own work, and suddenly you are hearing it, reassembled like a sort of Lego. I mean, it's a kind of a Lego, literary Lego, where you're basically, sort of rearranging all the blocks. So this work is called Fall Again, Fall Better, and it links to a text by Samuel Beckett where he has a phrase which is quite well known, which is fail again, fail better. And does anybody know how that translates into French?
Échouer, échouer encore, échouer mieux.
Fail, yeah?
Fail,
yeah.
échouer.
And I don't know if we were talking about tattoos earlier. It's interesting, if you go to Google and you say, say fail again, fail better, tattoo, you will be shocked to discover that lots of people are tattooing themselves with this text, fail again, fail better. And there's one famous tennis star, I can't remember his name, one tennis star who has it in big letters on his tennis arm, fail again, fail better. Yeah? So this interesting text, this interesting expression of Beckett has become somehow, very current and very ubiquitous as some kind of expression of maybe our somewhat hopeless situation. Fail again, fail better, which is a kind of mystery. How can you fail better? Yeah? And this work is called Fall Again and Fall Better, and it also has this mystery of what does it mean to fall better? How can you fall better? And indeed, every time I step on this mat, they will fall. And when I step off the mat, they will come back to life or pop up again. And then when I step on the mat, they will fall again. But the software which controls this behavior is such that when they fall, they will never fall the same way twice. And I'll just watch it a few times. Just watch what happens every time I step. Okay? I mean, this arrangement of bodies, well, I can tell you that this arrangement of bodies will never, ever happen again once I step off. You'll never see that ever again. It will never repeat itself. It cannot repeat itself because there are too many variables. So 1,000,000 times or 1,000,000,000,000 times that I step on this mat, they will never fall the same way. So that's where the link comes to the title, Fall Again, Fall Better, or the question mark, the question, fall, what is falling better, and also the peculiarity of your own interactivity, that it's your body, your feet, okay, you're standing here upright, that causes them to fall. So you are actually the responsible for their condition. So the work, I don't know how to give you more detail on this. Looking at bodies falling has a very strong psychological sort of impact, in the sense that you know, in the real world, when we see somebody falling, we have very mixed reactions. I mean, one reaction is to laugh, because we have a tendency to laugh at people falling, a kind of Buster Keaton world, yeah, of the comedy of falling, but also the tragedy of falling, and also the peculiarity of how important falling is to us, what it means to us that we have the power to stand on our own 2 feet, and we have the memory of when we do have the evidence of when we were children, when we were babies, and we had to learn not to fall, learn to get onto our feet. Yeah? So we have a beginning point where falling is fundamental to our experience, and also at the end of our lives we return to the threat of falling, because as we get older the danger of falling increases, and of course there is the final fall when we don't get up at all, ever, again. So falling is a very, it's a very powerful metaphor, and very meaningful, and actually this work is just an engagement with that experience, but also it is an engagement with the evidence of what it means to see bodies that have fallen, especially in a group like this, that this evokes certain memories of what one has seen, the evidence of situations that have caused people to die, have died. And there's another peculiarity in this work, or aesthetic, let's say, emphasis, and that is that these bodies, the way they are constructed, the skeleton of these bodies is not a normal skeleton. They're actually constructed like a marionette. And when you let them go, they will fall like a marionette. They don't fall like a normal person. You'll see that there's something unnatural about the way they are falling, which would not be, often not possible. And this is, again, if you think of such a wooden puppet on strings, and you let it go, it falls in a certain way that a human doesn't fall. It has a different logic. And these people behave like that. Now, what does that mean? It has the result of that is a certain association, which is quite terrible, in fact, because the way, when a body falls naturally, it won't fall like this. But once the body is down, and the body then is picked up or thrown into, I mean, if we, let's just take one image. We take an image of bodies in a concentration camp, yeah? Let's just say bodies that are thrown onto a cart. When bodies are thrown together, they can look like this, yeah? Because once they are dead, they have lost their, the logic of their. So there is a certain aspect of this which also evokes these imagery of bodies which are in this quite tragic condition. And then, I don't know, I mean, you might also appreciate this sort of aesthetic arrangement of all these forms, purely from a. And also the algorithm has some peculiar artifacts, so this figure couldn't actually fall properly and is still in a slightly unstable state. Any questions about that? Also, you see a choice about gender. I tried to make these figures genderless as much as I could, and to also make them somehow generic, not any particular person. And also there's a choice of colour, which is, on the one hand, you could say black and white, but also has a bit of that brownness of old photography. Yeah, so it should evoke a little bit the atmosphere of photographic evidence, of a photographic reality. Yeah? Because a lot of these images that we see of these kinds of disaster situations are as a consequence of photographic evidence. Actually, what I'm showing here is this archive of works. The way you explore it is you have a front page which shows many different works. You can choose any one of them. I'll choose this one. This is a work we made for William Klein, a French photographer, and he made a film called Mr. Freedom. And then made in 1969, and we made this dragon for this film. And there's also a little bit of video. I'll just see if I can jump forward a little bit. Okay, there's the dragon. It's the English version of the film, unfortunately. I mean, you can go online and watch this film in French. It's quite. And then afterwards, we took we used the same. I mean, we didn't want to waste this dragon, so we started to use it as in other contexts as well. So this is an archive of work, and instead of showing the entire archive, it's divided up into different groups. So it's a kind of curatorial selection of different works. There's one selection here, there's another selection here, and a third selection over there. So 3 people can operate simultaneously, which means there will also be chance relations, which I thought would be nice. Somebody's looking at this, but they look across and they see how this connects to that. So it's also a little bit of a recombinatory poem, in a sense, that you're getting chance relations between the different works. But this group of works, which is actually not just participation, but to do also with structures of participation, also shows a lot of early work with gonflable, yeah, with the inflatable structures. And you see a lot of these I'll just go back again. Let me just choose. So a lot of these sort of interactive works that involve, inflatable structures. So you'll see many in this. There are many different works here. So you can spend quite a lot of time here, sort of exploring all these different works from different times. This section here circulation. Actually, in English, the expression is going around. All of these works in this selection involve some kind of going around. And either the work is going around you, or you are going around. I mean, I'll show you this work here, which is a work I made at La Villette. It's no longer there, but it was there for the first, I think, 5 or 6 years of La Villette. And this was an optical system, also augmented reality, where you were looking through a window, and you could turn the window, and you could discover different things in different parts of the museum. So you would have, let me just find an image. So this is what it would look like. You would see this image, but you would see people walking around in the museum, and you could discover different images in different parts of the museum. But it involved the rotation of this system to find these different works. And then so this was another machine that rotated 360 degrees. Another typical one would be this one. But I don't have, do I have video of this? Let me see. Yeah. Okay. So this is one of the very early pieces from 1995. So you're on a platform and you're rotating a window to discover a panoramic space. Yeah. So it's very much also to do with navigation, being able to travel in a virtual world, and I'll show you this too, because we've looked at the recombinatory poetry wheel, but this is an earlier version of the same work. And in this work, Edwin Thumbu is projected in 360 degrees all around you. And he is standing life-size. So it's as if you're standing in a space, immersed and surrounded by him. And here the interface is a little different. Here the interface So here the interface is a microphone, and this microphone controls a virtual microphone. So as you move the microphone around, he will speak to the microphone. And also it's in 3D. Normally speaking, when you view this work, you would be wearing 3D glasses and you would be seeing these figures as 3D people around you to create, the illusion that he's multiplied all around you, and you can point the microphone at each one and he will then start speaking. Well, there's a lot more there, but again, all of these works are held together by this, you could say, immersive, fully surrounding image space which you can explore. And the last section here is another group of works. I mean, they overlap too. I mean, you'll find some works which are here, but are also in this section. But here, the topic is past, present, and almost all these works have a link to, you could say, historical, to art history or to historical events. So, I mean, let me show you an example. So here, for instance, Heaven's Gate, which links to the Baroque ceiling painting. So here, Heaven's Gate is located in this grouping. And also, let me show you another work. So this is a work done in India, and these are, it's a work that involves looking up at the architecture of different ceilings in different buildings. And also recent work involves some work with Chinese martial artists. So we've been doing work with motion capture. I'll show you an example of the motion capture. So this is motion capture of one Kung Fu master, and then this is transformed into an installation where you can see the motion captured figure in 3D on a screen, actually on 6 screens. You can view it from 6 different points of view, and then you can choose different visualization strategies or different ways of visualizing the movement. So this is a kind of calligraphic expression of these movements. And just by pressing a button, you can change from one visualization style to another. And each visualization style, in some way or other, gives expression to these, to the movement of these. So here the movement is building a kind of sculptural form, which is the expression of that movement in space. And here you are just isolating the power, the energy. So you're just measuring the speed of the movement. And depending on the speed, you are increasing the intensity of these sort of flashes. Okay, so that's how this is organized. And so this really is just a space to explore, in a way, the history of my own art practice, but also to explore it according to certain thematic organization.